Hello, hello. Let's get that sound check for the chat real quick. Archaix Underground is doing really well. We do have admin little issue with subscriptions, but that's being taken care of. So like I told you the other day, if you get booted out, just come back in. It's no big deal. It's no big deal. We should hit about 2,400 new subscribers in the Archaix Underground, checking out the new social media. Also, I uploaded a video. It's not on YouTube, but it is in Archaix Underground because it's just one of those type of videos, guys, talking about current events. Just one of those things. I wish I could put it on YouTube. Not advisable. So we have a special guest in backstage right now. He has done some work with John Nolan. A lot of you guys know. Inspired Channel has had a lot of fantastic guests. Frank Jacob is one of them. And if you are interested in pursuing more of what the topic is today, we're going to be talking about several different topics, some really interesting stuff. We've made some small talk backstage. Some of these things are compelling, and you can see his links in the description box. I've also added his YouTube channel to the description box. His website, masterclass, is pretty impressive guy. But you guys are the ones that submitted his name with the list that I asked you for. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Mr. Frank Jacob to the stage. Let's see. Let me see the setting here. Is this better? This will be better for now, right now. So, how you doing, Mr. Jacob?
I'm doing great there, Jason. Pleasure to finally link up with you live for I guess I like to call them jam sessions. You know, I was just in Arlington at the Arlington Institute just a week ago, and there was a few of us, and I was giving a talk, and you know, we were riffing off each other like crazy. And it was like we were like the jazz. We were calling it like we were like the jazz musicians, and we were doing a live improv, and people were tripping.
Oh yeah,
so this might be just like
Arlington Institute. Is it notable for anything in particular?
Well, it was founded by John L. Peterson, who is now the late John Peterson, and that was one of the things that was going on that time. It was a kind of a memorial. Although I had been scheduled, he has something called Transition Talks, and he's a futurist. He's founded it, I think, a few decades ago in Arlington, West Virginia. And then he heard about something that was coming down the pipeline somewhere, or ready to hit Arlington, and he decided to move operations to Berkeley Springs, just outside of Arlington. And that's where things have been relocated, and that's where I found myself a week ago. So my voice might be a little hoarse. I came back and I pretty much had laryngitis. I'm still recovering, so bear with me if my voice drops out or something.
It's all good. So I've always got voice problems. Let's see. Looking at my chat, a lot of familiar people in here. Oh, we'll have well over 1,000 here in the chat within a few minutes.
Well, thank you to everybody for putting me on the list. I guess I owe them a thank you, definitely. So it was an unexpected surprise. I was very happy to see it. You beat me to the punch.
I have two lists. I'm going to have to be honest. I got two lists, and my community is high participation because in the past I've done 2 videos for the public where I said, "Hey guys, check it out, man. There's a lot of misinformation in the field. There's a lot of people who are disingenuous. There's a lot of grifters out here." I said, "Listen, I want to do a shill list. Who in the hell do we need to avoid?" So congratulations, you didn't appear on any one of those 2 videos. But I did a third video where I said, well, who do we need to listen to? Who are the ones that are in the field that are promoting ideas for the perpetuation of congruity, for coming together, for anyone out in the field, no matter if we disagree with some of the particulars, it doesn't matter. But who are the names that I need to know? Because I had my community educate me. Who do I need to know that's actually out there with a passion and actually trying to further the human experience and not trying to detain it or being disingenuous with the misinformation? People we like to call shills, people we like to call agents, your Mr. Smiths. So congratulations, man. You didn't end up on the too bad list, but you did show up on the good list. So And I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm an extremely busy guy, Frank, and I ask my community for that type of guidance because I'm so immersed into my own studies. Just like you backstage, you were telling me about what you do and how deeply involved you are in your own study. You haven't had time to look at a lot of the archaic stuff, man. I appreciate that honesty because it's mutual. I just don't have. We have to rely on our communities. I don't have that time to go investigate everybody out there. I just have time to continue to provide content to my community, just like you do for yours.
Well, that sums it up very well, actually. You know, I think anybody who takes their work seriously is facing those same issues, because, you know, if you really do want to grok something, as we like to say, you have to spend the time with it, and you can't be doing social media posts 12 to 18 times a day while you're deep, you know, on a deep dive in a particular subject. And so I fall definitely into that, where I, you know, you don't see me on Facebook for days or whatever. I just don't post because I'm busy. I'm deep into it. And, you know, it's research is an up and down thing. Sometimes I'll start something like with a webinar, what are now, I guess, more like master classes. I start it, and then I might have to take a break and go on a trip or something. And then a month or something will go by. And just to get back, you realize, okay, what I started, you know, I've got these other pieces to it. And it's, for me, it's about, well, total, of course, honesty, you know, with the material, and honesty with yourself, and with the integrity of the material. And the other thing that comes into play, that has come into play, is that you might start with a certain premise, and, you know, as years go by, if you continue, if you're true to the spirit of wanting to get to the bottom of things, you might find that a premise or an idea or a hypothesis you had no longer is valid, and or has changed context, and you need to recontextualize it. And if you're honest with yourself and with your audience, you'll sort of bring them forward with you to make to evolve into that. And that of course is hard work. And of course it's, you know, there's a lot of people that have been singing the same song for the last 15, 20 years. You know what I mean?
Right. I do know what you mean. And I have changed my mind as well. I was not a simulationist. I am now, I'm just now 100% on board with, we're in some type of scientific experiment. We're inside some type of construct. And I didn't come by this conclusion by the ordinary means. I came about it by studying calendars and ancient timekeeping systems, and I have revealed this to my community in numerous data sets. I have showed them what I found, and many people in my community have made the same conclusion based off the same material, that the historical record in the events that we have, and we can verify the dating through so many different sources and so many different vantage points, and yet it's too perfect. It has been laid out in such mathematical structuring that I am convinced that the entire history of the world is a production of an advanced AI. And that I think that artificial intelligence programs and software are far older than the public sector is even aware. I think these have been running for a long time, maybe a breakaway civilization in the underworld. Somebody has been using technology, at least for the last 300 years, to modify our perception of our present world. And this is the subject matter of my channel, just showing from the ancient record and the text that we have, and showing with a calculator, look, this is too perfect. These events are all unfolding in proportions of pi and phi, and there's no way these are natural historical events. And yet these are the dates given to us in all these very old books. So yeah, I had to change my mind too. I changed my mind from a Newtonian universe that we're on a ball going around the sun and all that. Now I see the sky as something more illusory, something that's dropping things on us, like Charles Fort's research and William Corliss. We find the oddest, weird. That's something I wanted to talk to you about. It's a lot of plasma phenomena seems to just fall from the sky, or it has an origin in the sky, and it seems like sometimes the sky is more illusory than it is an actual luminaries and planets, and it's something else. Maybe the sky is holographic and it's hiding its true nature. I don't know, but I do know that I did look at your material, and you were talking something caught my. I would like a description of what you mean in your presentations. You call it the plasma matrix. What are you talking about?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm glad to hear that you're taking this route. I mean, I'm not. I'll just be upfront. Like, I don't. My position towards simulation is, as of about the last couple of years, I've moved in the direction of Sethian Gnosticism, which is not the usual pop Gnosticism that most people are familiar with, which is the Valentinian Gnosticism, which is that the early Gnostics were early Christians.
Right.
This isn't true. This has been totally maligned, and you can't really know that until you spend enough time with the true Gnostic message to know the difference between where it's been infiltrated or contaminated with these early Abrahamic ideas of the Redeemer ideas and the Savior and all this stuff that the Gnostics spoke out about when at the time these religions were taking root. I would almost say that what you're calling this, that something's been acting and working on us, it has taken up another dimension altogether since about 2,000 years.
Okay.
Or actually, you could say 1850 BC. You could even include those years as well. But really, the formation of the Abrahamic religions was kind of like an overlay. And this is exactly, what I would call simulations has to do with an archontic simulation. It was a Coptic word that the Gnostics had for it called hell. So it showed us that they knew that archons, what they called archons, an anomalous inorganic a creature that was created during the birth of our planet, have influence to try and pull us away from an organic intelligence. So I distinguish between artificial intelligence and what I'm calling OI, or organic intelligence. And so I think it's great because I'm pursuing this this direction of the Gnostic materials after I ran into another amazing scholar by the name of John Lash, and I went into his material, and with regard to another subject altogether, but it pulled me deeper and deeper into it. And so now I'm trying to find essentially the roots of source materials and what that means. And so doing that, you find out there's another creation narrative altogether, which these telestai, the Gnostics, which actually wasn't really what they were called. Gnostics is a word given to them by the church fathers to mean kind of those know-it-alls, the smartasses, right?
Okay, based off the gnosis.
Right, exactly. So their true name was the telestai, those who are aimed, or those who want to know. It was all about knowledge, right? And they were more like intellectual shamans who went into altered states in groups and did it in a very disciplined way and connected with the divine planetary animal mother, which they called Sophia. And so you find out about this creation narrative in which the archons were actually born anomalously before Earth even existed. And so that's an interesting angle that very few people have really explored very well. And one of the reasons is because the Gnostic material that most people think is Gnosticism is done by biblical scholars who are, picture it like this. You have a pile of Legos. The Nag Hammadi codexes were found in 1945. And right. It's the oldest set of bound books that have ever been found. And in it is like all this material, and it's jumbled around. And it's like a box of Legos, And so the people that are looking for their validation as a Christian theologist or as a Jewish theologist or Hebrew or rabbinical, they will find that Lego piece there that fits, and then they'll stick it on their wall of what they're looking for. And if the part about the archons or all this other stuff that doesn't fit the biblical narrative doesn't fit, they just plain out ignore it. So that study ends up leading you toward the fact that these early Gnostics actually knew something which now in modern times we're calling plasma cosmology. And it's closer to something called the electric universe theory, which is to say that the world, that there is no empty space and gravity isn't the driving force in the universe, and there wasn't a big bang. And all of these, things about particles and quantum physics, and these things are all like misleaders, which are part of the story that came after the 2,000-year time period that I was just saying.
I want to interject because this is a great conversation, great direction. But I want to make it very clear that you're talking to a community that has seen data sets that I have produced that we're pretty much in agreement that the Old Testament isn't much older than the New Testament. The compositions of the Old Testament writings only antedate the Christian writings by maybe 150, 200 years, and that when Judaism is when the rabbinate was basically putting together their Old Testament narratives and inventing histories that did not exist, that later became known as the Apocrypha, the apocryphal text, and all the fictitious pseudepigraphical texts, we're talking about maybe 110 BC to about 110 AD. That window there is Old Testament is being written. All the lies about it being written in the Alexandrian library, and there's no evidence of an Old Testament anywhere in ancient times. And as a matter of fact, it only first appears at the same time the New Testament is first mentioned by Christian authors. And the reason I'm saying this is because it's very interesting that Gnosticism was already well established before Judeo-Christianity even had a library, before they even had texts that they were talking about. So I'm on board with that. I'm going to admit, I do not understand the distinctions between the Valentinian. I don't mind having John Lamb Lash on my channel tell me all that. I don't make the distinction yet. My knowledge of Gnosticism is also through a lot of church scholars. And
right. Well, that's why these exchanges are very useful, because everybody should walk away from something like this, from this kind of a conversation, with more intellectual stimulation to look and to dig up some more information. And for me, I guess the biggest thing you realize is that people they're cherry picking these old what I call pop Gnostic texts. They're cherry picking them. I just heard again somebody say that they had a vision about the Earth being owned by this, what they then end up doing research and finding out was Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, the Gnostic, that what the Gnostics were describing, right? But the problem is that you can't stop there. If you're going to quote that source document, then you should look at the rest of the material that belongs with, and not stop there, because if you stop there, it makes it seem like the Earth is a prison that has been created by these archons, when that's totally the opposite of what the Gnostics were talking about and left for us. But of course, they were destroyed and their materials were destroyed. And those fragments, that Lego set that I was just describing, is all we have of what, the Library of Alexandria you just mentioned, was one of many libraries that were accumulated in times that were going on way before 4,000, 5,000 years ago. That you can imagine the data sets they had, libraries like with maps and with artifacts and books. They were burned down, destroyed, or hidden, or taken into custody, if you want to call it that way.
Oh, I agree. I know from the Pergamum library, Alexandria was sacked three or four times.
Right.
We have this huge, massive 15th century old Christian narrative where the Christians are blaming everybody for the destruction of libraries. But when you go to the source materials and you go to the writers and historians and chronographers that were living at the time, it was the Christians burning the libraries.
Absolutely. So, Irenaeus was particularly adamant about burning the material and hunting down those who had little bits. And that's why, a lot of the Nag Hammadi library is kind of like shoved in between books and fragmented, because it was almost like the person was trying to hide some of the Gnostic material. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is that even the way it starts, like the first book already has right at the very top, elements of in the first codex is packed in essentially something you're talking about, apocryphon, right? The apocryphon of James, right? And so people think, oh wow, okay, this is how it starts. And if you know anything about reading into the material, you also know there's something called the first apocalypse of James, and that is a Gnostic document, and it's completely different than the apocryphon of James, which is basically a letter form documents which are romanticized. And you find out that we're jumping around a bit here, but you find that essentially that the Gospels themselves are completely fictitious inventions that Paul later, who was part of an extreme sect which lived in Qumran, calling themselves the Zadik or the Zadokites, the righteous ones, which in the soft pop Gnostic world are considered the Essenes, the sort of sandal wearing, meditating sprout growing hippies.
Weren't they into the world zealots? Weren't they preaching this the end times?
Absolutely, they were violent, my friend.
Yeah, they were fanatic, dagger wielding, into the world zealots. Is what I was under the impression.
Absolutely. So I totally I'm on board with you completely there. These documents were not original; they were pieced together, and they were pieced together with a purpose. And that purpose, see, that's where I look at that mind control element, this archontic overlay, which leads us astray. It's an error. And what I found interesting about the Gnostic material is that the Gnostics didn't believe in an evil force in the universe. They believed in error, and that humanity, the anthropos, had a special gift to be able to learn from errors. But if the errors are gone, if they go uncorrected, they begin to fester. And the archons, being genius in the sense of pulling our attention away through their form of simulated overlay, they'll keep us from fixing the errors. And so those errors will fester and grow over time into the structures of society that we have around us, which are not true to the real ultimate purpose of what humanity could realize on this planet. That's one of the key themes here. Okay. And, when you were talking about plasma, like you're saying, yeah, plasma, like what is it, right? So you find out that what these Gnostics knew about is identified now as plasma. The very most basic essence of plasma could be called akasha, because akasha is another word for the ether, and the ether is another word for plasma. And what people mistake often about plasma is they think it's some kind of a gas out there, that they can see, that people talk about or whatever, or biophotons are a part of plasma. But plasma has several different states. And those states say a lot about what is actually contained within the state. So the matrix of the plasma is probably the best way to describe it, is kind of this etheric fundamental substance from which all probability and all potential in the universe is stored and comes out of and is put back into. It's almost like a cyclical field, morphogenetic field consciousness, which basically interacts with us in real time, with humanity and all sentient beings, actually.
Yeah, well, you're speaking my language. I mean, I don't use those terms, but my own community is very familiar. I borrow the terms from theoretical physics called the informed field, and that all inanimate objects and all biological organisms, they have this information in a field of everything they've ever come into contact with, any vibrations that have been absorbed. It's just well, basically, you're telling me plasma contains information. So
yes,
that I'm on board with that. I'm not really familiar with the morphogenetic field, but I understand it's basically what I've been talking about is an informed field, and then the constructual over field that we interface with all the time, where there's an exchange of information, whether we're conscious of it or not. And so, yeah, if that's a state of plasma, I'm absolutely on board.
Right, and connected, of course, to that is that there's a lot of ancient texts that talk about two bodies, or the two bodies, and you've probably come across that as well. And in a sense, what it's saying is that we each have two bodies. We have this material body that we're in, that we have senses. We have 12 senses, and we're 5 senses, but actually 12 senses. Something I learned while I was in Arlington Institute, by the way. Very fascinating topic, but we don't have to go into it right now. But let's just stick with
I've heard of a sixth sense. I've heard of a sixth sense, but you've even doubled that. 12.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Yeah, I mean, but let's not go into that right now. Let's just stick with the 5. But we have these senses, these sensory organs in the material world, and we have time, so we can try things out and we can explore cause and effect. But we also have this other body, which is this luminous body, which is probably more like a plasma body, the plasmic body, you could say. And one of the authors that I discovered and explored in my journey of exploring the plasma topic, of course, is Robert Temple. But there's also others that are in it. I mean, Robert's kind of he's like an aggregator, and I'm learning from people that are also researchers in plasma that some of the ideas that Robert puts in his book aren't necessarily his own ideas. So whatever that is, but the fact is he's a good aggregator, and he basically puts together these concepts about how we have these plasma states. We have plasma within our body. We emit biophotons, and we connect with these other etheric fields. These the ether around us is actually continuously in touch with us. Now we also have something which everyone knows about. It's called DNA, and right. DNA is another one of those topics that is very, very, you could say it could be hotly contested. There's many different opinions about what DNA is. I like to look at, the more I'm diving into this stuff, I look at DNA more like antenna, and one of the things, one of the discoveries that I brought into this latest webinar that you have so nicely and generously put up as the thumbnail on the talk we did today about ancient X-files and the plasma matrix has to do with, some of the findings that were made with respect to DNA and the morphogenetic field. And what people were thinking about was that, and the general consensus is that we are the DNA, and that you can change our DNA and you can hack our DNA, and that, we are basically, it's our building plan. It's the blueprints for our bodies. Well, what I actually show in this newest venture that I'm putting forth and positing to us all is that this isn't true. That actually this is just the tip of the iceberg. The actual substance of that material of what we are is dormant and lays within this akasha field, within the plasmic field. And that brings about some very, very spectacular pieces of information. So I actually demonstrate like a real life Jurassic Park experiment that took place in the 80s in Switzerland, which proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that nothing is lost, that that you can actually pull back genetic information from hundreds of millions of years ago and bring it back into the now if you set up the proper field. This is why fields became such an important topic for me. And it's, of course, not so easy to explain fields and things like that. So that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is to try and put something together which people understand. But I think it's extremely important for people to know that, because, there's this idea that, that we are living kind of in a trap or in a simulation. And, you can get carried away with that a little bit, I believe, because if you put too much into that, then you're forgetting that beyond that simulation is still the original code. And I think I do a pretty good job of positing that hypothesis for people to check out.
Hey, you know what? It's very well spoken, but I'm gonna have to temper that with simulation theory as promoted in Archaix is not soul trap. As a matter of fact, I'm so against soul trap. I got whole videos against soul trap. We're not with it. But you did mention something very, very compelling, and that is that this morphogenetic field, I'm still sticking to construct. We call it a world, planet, whatever. I'm still sticking to whatever this experience is. It seems to me mathematically holographic as well, but we cannot ignore the research of William Corliss of the Sourcebook Project or Charles Fort, because both men went through the last 500 years of eyewitness and scientific reports, and they have documented very compelling things I've showed my community, such as what you just said. It seems like this experience maintains information for all the genetic and life codes of everything. And when an area of the world is suddenly bereft of organisms for which it normally populates that part of the world, and humans enter it into the field in newspapers, magazines, coffee shops, conversation, hey, where'd all the crickets and butterflies and moths go? Then all of a sudden there seems to be an overcorrection. And I documented on my channel many times in the historical record where insects and rodents or amphibians and frogs, they just disappeared, and people started noticing it. And then after a significant amount of people entered it into the field, it's like the field went into overcorrection. It started raining frogs. It started raining rivers of locusts and crickets, more than the area actually needed. But the very fact that this could happen, the very fact that organic materials can fall from a blue sky and they weren't sucked up by a typhoon, or all that's been dismissed. Any idea critics talking about, well, a tornado or a hurricane got all that stuff in the stratosphere and then rained those fish down right here. That's not happening, because tornadoes are not discriminating. There's never been a time when two different species of fish or fish, frogs, turtles, and snakes all rained. It's always the same species of frog, the same species of fish. Therefore, there's something else going on here, and it's been too well documented. So I'm thinking that you're right, that this experience, whatever we're in, it's life sustaining. It has the ability to create life from coding ex nihilo.
Well, absolutely, and if I go to the Gnostic narrative about what that would be, of course, that is, they call it Sophia's dreaming. And, that Sophia was a plasma torrent at the center of our galaxy, which essentially broke with the protocol of these if you can imagine these plasmic torrents as super intelligent streams of consciousness that are habitating at the center of concentrated energy at the center of every single galaxy. This has been something which has been hypothesized because they were able to take plasma in laboratories and create like simulated plasma experiences, and they found that when they created plasma structures, that at a certain point they actually began to exude or exhibit signs of intelligent behavior. And that was kind of a big shock for many of them. And that's why I think to date plasma is one of those top secret subjects which you don't hear too much about. And there's probably a good reason for that, because the study of the ether and plasma was like really bustling almost to the date 100 years ago. And then it was totally changed. And somebody we all have heard about called Nikola Tesla was somebody who was dealing with etheric energy in the plasma. And then along came, his sponsor, JP Morgan, and he realized that what he was working on could pose a direct threat to his financial empire, and the rest is history. He cut the funding, but he didn't just stop there. He actually slandered the technology, slandered the science, made Tesla into a fool. And then they looked for a competent replacement, a believable Wizard of Oz to, substitute this new form of science. And that was, of course,
Albert
relativity
Einstein.
theory and Einstein. Yeah. And that whole idea of the Big Bang and all this stuff and gravity model, that was then ushered in. And, he was introduced to the German Society of Scientists, and they praised his work and his mathematics. And then mathematics and theory took over from experiment and empirical knowledge.
Well, there was a time. Do you remember there was a time when 2,000 something scientists, some of the prestigious scientists all over the world, signed a whole petition against Albert Einstein, but they suppressed that. But they all got on board saying this dude's a fraud and this whole theory is stupid, and they suppressed all that. But,
and we're seeing we're seeing the fruits of that now, because you look at all these relativity theories and the Big Bang and the black holes. No one's ever proven them. There's no evidence that they exist. And the more they look, the more holes they find, and the more substitutions they have to include. That well, we don't know how to explain that. Let's just plug it with this word or this symbol, and we'll figure it out later, right?
It wasn't just Tesla. Reichenbach was in prison too. You remember his studies on the Odic force? He was probably
you're talking about Wilhelm Reich.
Yeah, Wilhelm Reich. Yeah,
absolutely.
The Odic force. He was talking about the same things. They imprisoned him. They demonized him as well.
Exactly, and Reich was leaning on, of course, these Gnostic informations about essentially what the universe, what is the driving factor of the world, right? And so, going back to the Sophianic narrative. Essentially, she turned into this planet, transformed herself, giving birth to this because we were her experiment, and provided us with a habitat. And that habitat basically is what we are trying to achieve, this human genius potential of the anthropos under the extreme duress of this anomalous archontic force, which has been there since day one. And the plasmic element of it is very interesting, because now we're starting to realize that not only is plasma this substrate, and not only does plasma have these 4 different states, but actually plasma seems to have a consciousness itself. And so the big question is now not, does it have consciousness? Or at least, in terms of the frontier science which I explore in Ancient X-Files, in the plasma matrix, it's no longer a question whether plasma has consciousness or intelligence. The question is, is it an intelligence of its own, or is it being run like a proxy or like a drone, which is projected to monitor our world? And then the question, of course, comes, well, if that was the case, then who's behind gathering that intel? It's just a really mind-boggling subject. And then you realize that when you reach outside of the ionosphere and you go between the ionosphere and the magnetosphere. We have this bubble, okay? Whatever is beyond the bubble, I guess, is up for debate. There's a lot of debate about it. But within that bubble, we have a double plasma bubble. We're actually living in a double bubble, a double plasma bubble. And inside the plasma sphere, between the plasma sphere and the ionosphere is literally, I would call it an aquarium of life in plasma form. And you know what it looks like most? If you were to stand on the earth and look up and see what the plasma forms look like, they look just like the orbs you see up there that people are calling UFOs.
Yeah,
and they look
UFOs. I can buy that.
And they fly. They fly intelligently.
Like they got plasma coming off of them.
Absolutely, they fly intelligently. They fly in groups. There's hunters. You know, they act like, you know, like they're literally. Some of them are hunting others. And they actually descend, you know, they photograph them descending into thunderstorms because they love energy. They tank up on negative ion energy.
I have videos that show that orbs inside tsunamis, inside the funnels of tornadoes. Yeah, orbs actually in the tidal wave itself as the tidal wave is coming.
Exactly.
I've showed all that on my channel.
So you find out that this plasma element is actually a main feature of everything that's within our double bubble. And it's been literally ignored. And we've got this whole, you know, this is probably one of the most controversial aspects of the new webinar, because everyone knows I've done ET films and I've done all this stuff with, you know, Packing for Mars and things. But like I said, I continually evolved into the story. And what you realize is that you can account for, you know, estimates are in the Journal of Modern Physics that probably 90 to 95% of the phenomenon which people are calling UFOs can be explained with intelligent plasma orbs. Now imagine that, right? So that really throws a wrench.
I can't imagine it. I have on my channel filmed of showing orbs creating agroglyphs, crop circles right next to Stonehenge. The films being filmed as the orbs go around and make these crop circles. So the crop circles, you know, for 15 years, I got a book published in 2011. The book I had published in 2011 was called Anunnaki Homeworld, and my main message was that all 500 of these books talking about 2012 is the end of the Mayan long count are an error. There has been an error in 1952 in the arithmetic. They didn't know what they were talking about. Mayan long count does not end in 2012. The only thing that's going to happen in 2012 is 2013. It's going to another, and I was right about that, and I've shown the math, and my book is still sold today. But in that book, I showed that I have 2 chapters on agroglyphs showing that whatever's making these crop circles, it's not humans. Don't believe 2 guys with tennis rackets on their feet walked in a circle and made all this. Something is communicating, and they're using geometry, arithmetic. They're using proportions of pi and phi, but these are messages, these agroglyphs. And so this would be in support of what you're saying about these plasma orbs being a form of intelligence.
Well, yeah, and what it leads me to now realize, Jason, is a pretty radical idea, especially in the ufology field. Out of, you know, which I've kind of been, you know, pulled into inadvertently because of the subject matter of some of the films that Tanya Maidenford, my filmmaking partner, and I have put out over the last 10 years. Is you realize that there seems to be a field called ufology, which does not address any of this. And when they don't address it, it makes you realize that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there. And then you think, okay, well, why? Well, I mean, it's clear that there is plasma research taking place at the most secretive levels of governments, and that there are literally orbs that are not part of the natural formation of plasma intelligences, but they've been, you know, you could say they've been hijacked by reverse engineering of plasma.
Yeah, the technology has been replicated. You for a really good example of what you're talking about is what happened to MH370 that Ashton Forbes is always showing everybody was a hijacking of this technology. The U.S. government is using that technology. Yeah.
Exactly, and so you have that on the one end, but I'm totally now at the point where I believe that really the minority of what's going on out there is actual, like, you know, UFO, whatever that means. UAP is the new word, unidentified aerial phenomenon, right? That could mean anything, right? It doesn't have to mean aliens from Arcturus or from Sirius, right? But that's a popular narrative. and that's got to do with something called the origin myth. But maybe we can touch on that a little later. But there's this idea that that you can keep people, especially that some of the very, very most intelligent people are really interested in this topic, and they can deep dive into this ufology subject. But if they don't know anything about this aspect of plasma, and they don't understand that there is this Gnostic narrative going back, over 2,000 years, describing this alien influence on humanity, you can actually get derailed, and you can start to pursue years of research into ufology, which will never lead you anywhere. Right. You have to ask yourself, why have they been talking about disclosure now for 25 years, Jason, and they haven't yet disclosed, right? What are they, the fact is, I believe they're so evolved with plasma research, they don't want us to ever find out, because plasma research, and plasma orbs opens the door to all kinds of things like time travel, 0-point energy, energy sources which are beyond what we're used to on this planet, space travel, which makes rockets and these kind of containers completely unnecessary.
Well, and what it does is if it was to be recognized on a collective level instead of just the few of us that are actually thinking about these things, what it does is it would move us out of the idea that we live in a physical universe and we're actually living in a multidimensional experience, and that is going to change everything. That would change almost every way we perceive our reality, being absolutely physical. What you're describing is an admission by government that they're now dealing with hyperdimensional technologies, and that, we know they have. Look at the Philadelphia experiment. I mean, they did something very unusual when they disappeared that naval vessel, but they didn't take into account. They didn't take into account that when they disappeared that vessel, it would still be obeying some of the laws of physics in our environment, because the water was moving, and that's what killed all those guys, because they vibrated out too. And then when the steel frame reappeared, when they turned their machine off, all those guys were embedded in that steel decking of that ship. So, we've been experimenting on this type of stuff for a long time. But before you continue, I want to go back. Just, this is going to add value to this whole premise. In the future, you may want to look into this, but in the 1800s, there were hundreds of reports about star jelly. Have you ever heard of that?
I have, actually, yeah. And it's just, I would, so I'm not going to just go ahead, keep talking.
Star jelly is what they were calling fallen stars. And they see the fallen star. And even today, we see them all the time, and we call them fallen stars, and they're not. They're not. When people go investigate that area, it's gelatinous, and it's all over the ground.
Yes, absolutely. This is also plasma, Jason. And
that's why I'm mentioning it. I figured it was.
Yeah, and there's paintings, and I'm sure you're aware of those. Going back into the medieval times, that show these phenomenon in the sky, massive amounts of these orbs, and phenomenon that take place, like mana from the heaven and things like that. A lot of these things, they've been misconstrued moving forward. Unfortunately it's the same old problem we have. If you have a group of 20 people and you tell the first person a 2-minute story, and then you wait for that story to come around, right?
Yeah,
what's it going to be like?
Chinese whispers, yeah.
Exactly. So we have a lot of this stuff that took place in the ancient times, which is really, I'm beginning to believe, and I set forth a lot of this evidence and the webinar for you to check out, so that you can look at that, because it really does point to the fact that this plasma has been really intimately connected, and it's never been explained to us. Even right now, we're not really explaining it. We were onto it starting, in the 18th and 19th century, and then it was snuffed out. Probably at the point where we are at the threshold of cracking what it meant and actually moving science completely in that direction. That's one of the reasons, when you dig into kind of the electric universe material, you realize that they're talking about plasma being the future, being the plasma age. Why? Because plasma opens up this whole idea that the entire universe is not this like exploding, particle thing that took place in the Big Bang, 18 million billion years ago or whatever, but actually that it's a giant neural net, and that the they're now able to identify that plasma forms these nodes that extend at infinitum, and if you compress them and lay them side by side with a pictogram of the human brain and neurons, well, guess what? It looks exactly the same. So we have here an example of fractality, or what they call microcosm versus macrocosm. So in a sense, plasma connects everything, and it connects it much like the human brain is. And it makes sense to me that the human brain would be a microcosmic version of a kind of a universal structure, which is out there, that makes up the intelligence of the universe. That is the ingrained intelligence. And when you think of it that way, then you begin to look at, you know, what we see out there as actually nodes. They're different as nodes than they are as these dead rocks that are just, you know, described to us in particle physics. No, they're actually, think of them as entities. They actually are entities that have a certain function. Just like you in your brain, you have certain areas of concentration, nodes that have a certain particular function where information is processed that goes to that node, and that node distributes it to other nodes within your brain. So this is, if we start to think of the universe in terms of that, a macrocosmic system of nodes and information exchange, what does that do to space travel and to time? It changes the game altogether, right?
It absolutely does. I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking about if these morphogenetic fields are just everywhere, and we're all tapping into an overfield, it kind of makes you wonder. I envision an octopus in an absolutely zero light environment still gets around just fine. You know what I mean? Squids, octopus, all at the bottom of the ocean, there's zero light. There's nothing down there, and they still can defend themselves. They can attack. They can hunt and eat. We can't do it in the dark. You and I are going to starve to death. You know, even in our own kitchen, we're not going to be able to make anything to eat in the dark. So I don't know, man. That is pretty interesting. It's kind of makes you wonder where junk DNA comes into play, because I don't believe it's junk. I know we have these inactive sequences in the genome that they're still theorizing about, and I have my own theories because I'm trying to fit what you're talking about into something that I believe 100% to be true, and that's vapor canopy theory, because we have periods of time in the historical record when the sun wasn't visible, and that there was a vapor sky, and the air pressure was increased. And because of this increase of air pressure and nitrogen and oxygen, plants and animals, flora and fauna, grew to astonishing sizes. These periods only lasted 600-700 years, and then there would be a collapse, and that collapse always ended with what survivors later called a great flood, when this vapor canopy, the mesosphere drained. It's a cycle. It's the reason why we have maps of Antarctica with no ice on it. It's not because they're from the last ice age. It's because there was a recent vapor canopy. We just call it the Dark Ages. So we discuss these things in Archaix a lot, and I'm trying to think, how would plasma play into this cycle that we have documented in Archaix, that there are periods of time when lunar calendars and goddess religions take over and the sun isn't seen for centuries. And then when the sun comes out, it's after a collapse of a vapor canopy. The sun only appears after these long periods of disappearances. It only appears when there's a great flood. There's a great flood. Now the sun's in the sky. The sun is seen as a solar hero. All these new religions, all these solar religions, are all patriarchy takes over. The goddess and the matriarchal stuff, so it is all suppressed until the next building of the next vapor canopy. This is the Archaix model of world history, and I'm trying to think, how would plasma play into that model?
Well, you know, you're definitely onto it with cycles. And that's what one of the things that stood out to me about your work is that you accurately map out and depict cycles, and you do it on evidence. You base your work on evidence, and I really highly respect that. And it definitely correlates totally to what I was exploring in this new webinar, is that there are these cycles, absolutely these massive cycles, and these cycles are so huge that, you know, we're talking hundreds of millions of years of cycles, so that there could have been civilizations on Earth that came and went that we know nothing about, because they've been just totally covered over and vanished. And others have come and replaced them, and they've vanished, and others have come and replaced them. But it has to do with the story of the Anthropos. And it's interesting, you know, you mentioned about the covering
Did
the
you say
canopy.
you say anthropos?
The anthropos, that's the story of humanity.
Okay, I got it.
The anthropine story, like we are the anthropos. We're like the genetic experiment that the aeons at the center of that are in the pleroma, in this energy concentrated point, these massive intelligence torrents created these experiments, and they do that and they release them to see what the hell will happen. And so we're one of those experiments. In fact, we're the 10th iteration of the anthropine experiment. But it's interesting the way you're talking about these cycles, because it does relate. And I go into that to an extent about how we produced a DVD with an Austrian out of place artifacts researcher called Klaus Dona. And he has his specialty is to go around in the world, and people approached him as somebody who was the curator for the Austrian royalty. So they would come up to him and say, well, check this out, right? And it would be like rocks that are dated millions of years ago that show humans living together with dinosaurs, which don't make any sense, of course, in the traditional archaeological record. But if you look at the Sophianic creation narrative, that Sophia brought that information here, all that information started off in the ocean and moved its way out and developed as the continents congealed. And it was more like a mycelium version of generation before it became what we know now as the male-female polarity. Another long story, I get into it, we don't have to talk about it here, but what's interesting is you come across the idea that certain planetary bodies, such as the moon, weren't always in the position that they are in now. And that plays a huge role on what? Well, it plays a huge role on the electromagnetic environment and the density around the people living on the surface. So right now, for example, we live at 100 volts per meter, and it rises up to the ionospheres where it's like up in the hundreds of thousands of volts, right? So that's why you have this incredible charge of energy up there. Well, on the surface, it's been measured at 100 volts. Well, it wasn't always like that. It was much higher. And that has to do, of course, with plasma and the way, like there's something called the Schumann resonance, which is the frequency we have on the Earth between the ionosphere and the surface, which is comprised of several factors such as lightning bolts, the level of intensity. Again, that's a very interesting analogy because that correlates. If you take we had Michael Persinger in one of our films, Solar Revolution, who told us his studies of neurology showed that the human brain, the neurons firing in the human brain, the density of electricity taking place per square picotesla, as he described it, if you extrapolate that out to the density of the Earth under the ionosphere, it's an exact match, meaning that the neurons firing in our brain are replicated by the neurons, the electricity firing via lightnings in the biosphere around us, right? So what this means is that at different epochs in humanity, we had a much different energetic situation. The systems were different, and as a result, total different life evolved on the planet, came and vanished into nothing when, again, situations arose where cosmic influences took place or Earth influences took place, eruptions, landmass changes, all these things that have come and gone that we don't even know about that happened over the course of the evolution of Sophia, the being Earth, in her, because she's an evolving being as well. If we're going to assume that premise that, yes, Sophia is the Earth is actually a being, a living being evolving on her own and dreaming us, and having given us the ability to dream as well. And, that the way to prove that is that, well, look at all the inventions that we've made and look at all the work you've done. You dreamt of that work. You visualized it. You have this unique ability, like every human being, to put up to create these creative fields of thought and dream about things. And then they become reality because you actually have to see them first. And I'm sure you can attest to that, right?
Yeah. I'm also intrigued by the similarity. You were talking about the electricity produced from the brain. The original Matrix script, they changed it. But in the guy that wrote the Matrix, now I don't want to get into the controversy because the two producers of the Matrix, they kind of threw something out there, a wrench, to get people to believe that somebody authored the Matrix who did not. It was the original guy who authored all that, and he's been really suppressed. But this guy, his original story in the Matrix movie, humans weren't being used by a sophisticated AI, their bodies for energy. The AI was only using the electricity produced from the participants' brains. It says because of how much electricity can be produced from the thinking, and the best way was to get them to fantasize about a whole alternate reality world that they believed that they were in, and that created all the electricity that the AI needed to run itself. Was just create. It was a feedback loop. The AI created the fantasy world, and the humans loved living in the fantasy world, so the brain activity produced the electricity to run the AI that was running the fantasy world. So that's the original Matrix model. It was changed by those producers to putting people's bodies, avatars, in these pods of goop.
Well, I mean, it's of course, obviously, you can see the direct parallel to the Gnostic materials, right? But there's another author called Philip K. Dick who explored some of these similar concepts as well. So, yeah, the authorship of that story, of course, is there's a controversy around it, and I think even the writer is a woman called Sophia Stewart or something like that. I don't know, but anyway, yeah, let's not even get into that. But the point is here, it's a really interesting analogy, and that's why the Matrix film lends itself to such a great philosophical starting point to pursue the idea of what actually humanity is on this planet. Like, what are we really? Who are we really, right? And have we been captured by this kind of inorganic element that is preying upon the aspects of the human creativity, the fact that we can fantasize? We, like the Gnostics had, they had a way of determining or distinguishing between proper use and improper use of imagination. And you would ask yourself, well, how could there be an improper use of imagination, right? Well, of course, you can improperly use imagination if what you're using your imagination for is working counter to the idea of the evolution, the proper blossoming of the humanity, the genius of the anthropos, and the proper use of imagination being applied creativity, which is basically working for the benefit in harmony with the entire planet and other human beings. The other one works against it and isolates us, and the original one works as a form of a unified field, which we have yet to, in our current iteration, and you and I talking to each other and looking back in the history we can look back on, it has not yet been realized. Now, maybe it has been previously or come closer, but there are these epochs of time, and there are these legends of Atlantis and Lemuria and whatever, many others probably we never heard about, that come and go. So to me, it points to the fact that we haven't actually fully realized that unified dreaming, that we're supposed to connect with the planetary animal mother together to realize that next step, which nobody can predict. There is no template, there is no set of rules or laws where they said we're going to program the outcome. Because why, as a creator, God, let's just say, as an aeon, why would you create a program that you already know the outcome for? That's damn boring. I mean, you don't want that. You want to inject free will and novelty. Those are the two universal concepts that run the entire universe. And those are the ones which lead to excitement and to new things and to, organic blossoming of ideas which never existed before. So the Akashic record, or the idea of the field being the stored memory of what we've put in there with our DNA antenna and what we've siphoned back out so that we don't start from nothing with every iteration, can also be a way to keep us stuck there, because if we're invested too heavily in those existing patterns, then we'll forget that it's not about being locked into those patterns. It's about breaking out past those patterns and creating novelty using free will. And if we're stuck in that matrix of simulation, as you would, I guess, call it, and I think it's a fair way to assess it, then we're not using our free will, because there have already been scientific studies that have shown that you've already made up your mind a full 1/10 of a second before you actually go about executing the task that you have planned to do.
I agree. I just, when it comes to free will, I think the majority of the collective are living a reactionary life, and they're only living a life reacting to external stimuli. And then when it comes to free will, we're only dealing with a minority of souls here that actually get it, and they're making their lives. They're not living their lives. They're creating their world. They're not just, living in total response to all the stimuli that tries to guide them into whatever narrative or corral them into what I call here in Archaix dungeon programming, in some type of belief system that is so fixed that it does nothing but send you into an intellectual feedback loop. And there's so many of them. All religions are. There's just so many of them. But
right.
I want to ask.
That's something to me, just cut you off there, but sorry, you can. I hope you
Go
don't
ahead.
lose your thought. But that is something which I would say, if you want to talk about a trap, that's the perfect way to describe it to me, is to be trapped.
That's the only soul trap I know of is religion.
Right.
Soul trap. Yeah. Judeo-Christian religion's the main one, but Islam's no different. It's soul trap.
Yeah. Those Abrahamic religions are all the same. It has to do with the force that's outside of us that's going to redeem us. There's always something better outside of it. It's actually the birth of transhumanism. If you go back to those Qumran freaks that I was describing at the very beginning, they were the original transhumanists, because their idea of this savior was something that they invented and they romanticized, and Paul took it further, with the idea of the only begotten, the idea of the the singularity. Right, it's the monogenes is the word that comes out, and it's often interpreted with that Christian or that Abrahamic overlay as being God's only begotten. In other words, there's only one perfect being, and that being is God's son. Right. Well, I mean, what does that do to the rest of us? Right. Well, what are we then? It's nulla contendere. We're never going to be God's perfect son or daughter. Right. So this is a way to keep us trapped in the idea of actually, it's a form of transhumanism, because if you look at transhuman ideologies right now developing around us at a super hyper speed. In fact, I just did a talk on that. That's why I was in Arlington Institute. I did a 4-hour presentation about that. Essentially, that is exactly the idea, that there's a better place than here, that there's another destination we need to get to, because we ain't it, right? And if you really wanted to screw up the anthropos, why not, put a seed in there that says, no, you're not it. You guys are imperfect. The destination is actually somewhere off planet, or somewhere inside of a simulation in the computer drive, in a form of digital utopia. I mean, it's actually very clever if you think about it. But again, it's not organic. And that is the distinction that really only comes out if you kind of spend time digging into the original source documents to give you that perspective, because you find out that, hey, those people weren't so stupid back then. I mean, they actually knew this stuff, and they set up foundational ideas which we can still lean on to this very day, even though they're up to 4,000 or 5,000 years old.
Yeah, the church hated the Gnostics. They didn't like them because, like, Plotinus and Porphyry, these were two scholars that were calling the Christians out. It says, you just made that book up. That book, those authors you cite in that book don't even exist. Man, they were on their asses in the first 350 years of the Christian religion. Those who promoted the Gnosis. Even some of their critics, though, were also telling the truth, such as Irenaeus. Irenaeus was being critical of the Gnostics while also citing some of their actual beliefs, but he also even let it slip. And the Christians have never been able to suppress this, but he let it slip. That, why are you saying Jesus was crucified at 33? Jesus lived all the way into his 50s, and it's heresy for you to say that Jesus died before he was 50 years old. But they've never liked that part of Irenaeus.
Well, right, Irenaeus. Yeah, in fact, yeah, exactly. I love that you brought that up. I actually didn't know that part of it, but I know that Irenaeus put the Gnostics on trial, and it was through the trial records, literally going through the minutes of those trials, that you find out that he cited, the whole Sophianic narrative, that she came here and created the earth, because he was trying to get them, you say this, don't you? You say this, don't you? Right? So they had to, put some of the truth of what the Gnostics were saying out there on the record, at the risk of, others discovering it. Of course, they kept that under, wraps as much as they can. And the problem with a lot of, true Christians, I would say, you know, like, look, if you really want to get into Christianity, you should really go to the source documents and look at, you know, for example, who the Essenes really were. One of the scholars that really does a good job of breaking that story down and really makes most sense out of the New Testament is Robert Eisenman, you know, who's the guy that talked about the Tzaddikim, the righteous ones, and who they were, and brings in the idea of James, the brother of Jesus. If there, the reason we know about a Jesus, if there was such a man, even though he's not really named by name anywhere, but, you know, maybe they took two letters, and they always take these two letters and they use those letters as, oh, that's his name right there, right? Well, it isn't really 100% true. But what's interesting is if you look at that story of the Qumran sect, you find out that there was a brother of, I guess, Jesus, because even in their own records, you find out that there was a crucifixion which took place in the early part of the modern era. But that crucifixion had to do with the fact that that was the punishment that you went under if you were a terrorist or if you were treasonous against the Roman Empire, which is totally consistent with what that sect was doing in the Dead Sea while they were trying to plan how to rob the treasury of the temple. You know, they found maps and they found descriptions of the temple treasury in something called the War Scroll and the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in 1947. Why would that be there if these were only hippie sandal-wearing meditators? No, they actually had plans to go in there and, you know, terrorizing and overthrowing, of course, the Romans with the help of their Messiah. That's, you know, it already starts there, Jason, right? I mean, like, look, isn't it funny that they label the Dead Sea Scrolls with the letter Q? I mean, the Q, the Q phenomenon goes back 2,000 years, my friend.
Yeah, the Q. Yeah, I said that on my channel. I told people on my channel that I know where it comes from. The Q is short for the German Quell, like a query, a question.
Quelle, yeah, Quelle.
But yeah, they it's like Q drops 2,000 years ago.
Totally, right? Isn't it crazy? Like the number of the cave, the Q, and then the number of the manuscript in the order it was found. Like, I mean, like if you wanted an evidence of their Q being, and what were they talking about? The white hats, right? I mean, these guys were waiting for the white hats to come riding in on their chariots from the sky, which I say are plasma. They were subjected to that same thing because, interestingly enough, that area they lived in, the Dead Sea, is 430 meters below sea level, and it is the perfect magnetic, environment, and the salt content of the Dead Sea is 10 times higher than in a regular ocean. It's the perfect ground to attract those crazy little luminous objects and that are living up there in that.
You do know that one of the most mysterious biblical stories from the Old Testament involves that exact area, a flux tube discharge, a plasma discharge from the sky that vaporized 185,000 Assyrian soldiers under Sennacherib were leaving Egypt, passing by Jerusalem when the flux tube discharge just vaporized them in their armor. And there's, like, in the apocryphal records, they say the people of Jerusalem in the apocalypse of Barak, the people of Jerusalem went out there because they were scared. They were behind the walls when the Assyrian army was passing by, because the Assyrians had already threatened them that they're going to be next to be forced into tribute. And the whole story is in the book of in the story parts of the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, concerning the reign of Hezekiah. And it was 713 BC when the Assyrians were going by. And there was a solaric anomaly, and the king asked the prophet Isaiah to come in and say, "Hey man, you need to explain this to me. Why is the sundial in the courtyard? Why is the shadow retrograding 10 degrees? And the sun stopped moving." This is the narrative in the Old Testament. The sun stopped moving across the sky, and then it went backwards, and the Assyrian army in a second was vaporized in their armor. And this is there's been a lot of people like Immanuel Velikovsky who has written about the flux tube discharges, and a lot of people have associated to plasma. I know you're familiar with 1994, Comet Swift-Tuttle got too close to Jupiter, and it was caught on film, the flux tube discharge that was exchanged between the comet and the surface of Jupiter, and the comet, being the lesser mass, fragmented into 21 pieces, and it was all caught on film. So plasma is something serious. It does appear like lightning in the sky. sometimes.
Well, the battles, the Maccabeans that were going through, like, in that time, I think it was 147 BC, the Maccabeans were taking on the Romans, and there are all these wars that were taking place, and there are reports of UFOs above them in the sky, right? And
we see it. We've seen them in the artwork of
right.
the Middle Age period that was depicting 168, 169, 170 BC during the Maccabean period. Yeah, you see there is legitimate Christian cathedral art that shows UFOs in the frescoes.
Absolutely. They just didn't know they were plasma, and they didn't understand why they were there. And the fact is, they're attracted to certain energies. Negative ions, for example, is one of them, but they're also attracted to a certain kind of violence that takes place. And this is interesting because
Foo Fighters in World War II.
Exactly. Yep. That was the time when there was another, that was the modern birth of us being up in the atmosphere with airplanes. And that was suddenly, we've had all these orbs happening. And of course, they never explained them to us as plasma, but now there are actually academic papers. And I break some of those papers down, by the way, in my webinar. It's fascinating as hell, because you're realizing, whoa, wait a minute. These people are actually studying this stuff for decades, and they're not talking about it anywhere in the disclosure panel, right? But what it's showing us is that, these energies have accompanied humanity through their entire existence. And they are like, the only question remaining for me now is like, are they observers for another, higher intelligence, which, let's just say maybe it's Sophia or maybe it's archons or whatever. In fact, one of the things that I introduced into the webinar is something called the Kordylewski clouds, which are these plasma clouds which exist in the Lagrange points between the Earth and the Moon in the system. And that was a very fascinating subject that Robert Temple threw into his book, which, I was thinking, look, the Gnostics say everything is material, right? So even a comet getting sucked into, it's all a material form. Everything has a place in existence. Every neuron firing in your brain is a corresponding event that takes place on a cosmic level. So everything is alive. And if you're thinking in terms of the universe being a giant cosmic entity, like a consciousness, then there are no inanimate things that take place by accident, but everything that takes place has a purpose. We just don't understand what that purpose is yet, because we've been obscured from the study of plasma and plasma intelligences. So if we go back to those days where they're shown in the depictions on biblical paintings or described in early battles in Josephus and other, scriptures and things, you see descriptions of these, where they describe two kinds. They describe orbs and long cigar-shaped ones, right? Well, what do we have in the modern era? We have exactly those still appearing in the modern, mythology that we don't understand how to explain yet, because we're not talking about plasma. But it's telling us, look, what is it? This is the most interesting question, I think, standing before us right now, at least for me, because I'd like to know, are they their own intelligence and they're just attracted like flies are to light? Or are they something more? Are they probes? Are they drones? There are examples of ball lightning that comes down, and Robert Temple makes the great, tells that story in the webinar about how there's accounts of plasma orbs, lightning, ball lightning, actually studying the design on Persian carpets, right? And then there's cases of ball lightning that comes into airplanes and moves through the aisles. And, it's like stops, in front of certain people and makes strange movements, and then continues on until it quietly exits the plane on the other side. And then there's cases of where people are standing beside a plasma fire, a ball lightning, and then they're vaporized on the spot. So why did some get vaporized?
Spontaneous human combustion.
Spontaneous human combustion, right? So that begs the question, well, why did some plasma orbs devour that human, or those humans you described? Just, that was amazing. There's obviously intention there, and there's a certain force acting that indicates that there's preference or there's choice. So that inquires.
I've discussed these things on my channel, and I have videos that were my own conclusion, because I show the orbs inside the tsunamis, show the orbs inside the funnel of the tornadoes, show the Foo Fighters testimonies, the orbs that we actually filmed making agroglyphs, that they do act with intelligence. I have read 2 books by Trevor James Constable where he developed special ultraviolet lenses for his cameras, where he takes pictures of their behavior, how they change form, and how they act and move with intelligence, and how they even respond when they suddenly realize they're being observed. So, I in my on my channel, I've talked about all the fairy lights, the will-o-wisps, all these things have been seen for a very long time and mistaken for different stuff. But it is my conclusion that we live in a closed system, and that observers on the outside of that closed system, and you may disagree with this, but it is my belief that it's humans on the outside of this experience, and that we volunteered for this experience, and that this is more some type of hyperdimensional spiritual simulation of an actual world that does exist, but it doesn't exist here. And I've even hypothesized that this is necessary so we can do things like nanobots, so we can do things like Philadelphia experiments, so we can do things in here where there would be no cross contamination with the real universe on the outside. In here, we can do things that wouldn't be acceptable on the outside because of cross pollination, all this stuff. And it's also my belief that DNA is fantastically ancient, and that this experience we're in, we have lived through multiple different biospheres, and that the latent DNA, the inactive dormant DNA called junk DNA, actually activates when we're living in a high pressure environment, when we're living in an extremely low pressure environment, when we're living under a vapor canopy, when we're living in essentially like a water world. We have been through. These are just avatars. These avatars belong to the construct. What's important is the immortal within, the soul that's curious, willing to come back into this experience over and over and learn more and more and more. And it's my personal opinion that once we exit this atmosphere and return back to the outside of the construct, we're waiting in line trying to get right back in.
Well, I think it's important that you're pursuing this angle. Like, you call it your opinion. I would say it's your hypothesis, and you're trying to prove it, and you're looking for the evidence to prove it. And I think that there's nothing more valuable than doing that. I'm working on it. I'm probably trying to. I just think it's all about truth here. We're trying to get to the bottom of what is going on. I don't know if we're going to solve it. I don't know if we're going to solve it in our lifetime. I don't know if the piece that if that Frank Jacob, grabs and tries to sort out is going to be of any use to who he passes it to, or if it ever gets passed. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's the passion that I have to try and figure that out.
What we agree on is that this is an experience. It is a very unique experience. Right. We just may not agree on the particulars, and that's no big deal.
Well, and the thing is, like, there's no harm in both sides exploring the ultimate conclusions of where that idea leads you, that hypothesis leads you, because in the end, it might lead you to the same place with different language.
Absolutely.
And, right. So this is why it's important to, I think, to just, everyone should be spending their criticism not on, oh, that person believes this and I don't believe that anymore, or that whatever. It's like, for me, it's become more like, all right, cool, work it out. I'm totally down with it if you work it out and it makes sense and you can explain it and it resonates, because that's another very, very important aspect of it. It has to resonate with us. What you're talking about, junk DNA, in my terminology, I call it phylogenetic memory. It's the stored, accumulated experience on the DNA level, which connects, of course, to the akasha. So you could say the akasha is the part that connects to the entire universe, and that the phylogenetic memory of this experiment or this experience that we're living in on the earth connects strictly to the anthropos, or the anthropic experience. So, either way, it should lead us ultimately to the same conclusions, or we should be able to say, this is what I found in my terminology. And how does that fit with yours? Or does it actually give you some ideas that you can use, and that helps crack some little puzzle you may have been mulling over for a while, And it's like, oh, okay, well, this actually does fit really good in here. All I have to do is change this and that. And ultimately, that's where it's going to lead us. It's going to lead us to the truth.
Exactly. And to add to what you just said is that I can absolutely buy into your interpretation of the junk DNA. The reason I can is because if a DNA strand is like holographic, one little piece contains the information of the all. The all is present in its parts. If DNA is that fantastic, and we know that it is, it's amazing, and the junk DNA being dormant is actually storing information, then the analogy that I can provide is that it would be no different than our arithmetic. This whole world is based off a mathematical structuring, but our arithmetic would never work without prime numbers. Prime numbers are inactive. You can't do anything with them. You understand? But all the non-primes is where all the magic is. That's where all the subtraction, the adding, the division, the multiplication. We do everything with non-primes. The primes are absolutely necessary as a backfield to make all other mathematics operable. So junk DNA could be the information storage of a field that makes everything else in the field work. I can agree with this. I can agree with that 100%. It doesn't change anything that I believe about what I've asserted previously, because I do believe, and it's something that I teach in Archaix, is that until you've isolated what is apparently two opposite phenomena, they're not really opposite. They're not opposite. One does not negate the other, because
Right.
as you said, the more you analyze something, you may find out that the only difference is language, but you're actually talking about the exact same phenomena. No doubt. No doubt.
And we can look at words as placeholders, as I like to say, right? So if we can accept that words are placeholders for ideas that we can use to contain ideas in, then it shouldn't matter. We should be fascinated. And that actually, your work fascinates me, in that sense, that I would never take a look at it because I hear you say things that don't fit what I'm pursuing. No, it's quite the opposite, because if anybody's taking their work seriously and is trying to provide empirical evidence, it only is a fascination that makes you go, okay, well, it's like meeting, it's like two people from two different planets meeting in a way, saying, well, this is what we believe on our planet. And you're like, that's interesting. On our planet, we kind of believe this, and that actually correlates. It's very interesting,
Right.
So that's how I like to nowadays more and more look at it. I mean, I haven't always been that way. I mean, in the very beginning, I was always I would let myself be polarized. Maybe it's the fact that I have a Scorpio rising or something in my star sign, but now I've become, a little older, a little more tempered, and I realize, hey, everyone live and let live, and I'm just trying to pursue the path of research that I'm interested in the purest way possible, and I absolutely am willing to understand. Like, you need to let go of some things that no longer fit if you see they no longer fit, because holding on to them because you're invested in them is one of the worst things. And I hear this, out there in the
you see it a lot. It's toxic. It's all over the community.
Yeah, people are invested and they don't care. If this person's been proven and flushed out as a liar, there's too much invested in it, and they're going to go through with it. Yeah. I've heard that so often. It's like, oh God, please,
Look, check this out, Frank. I want to jump tracks real quick. I'm really curious about your opinion. What is really going on with CERN?
Well, now that I'm sort of moving away from the idea of particles and using it and more at the electromagnetic spectrum, I think what's going on in CERN, you've got these giant magnets, Jason, right? And they're firing, they're running them so that they're creating vortexes. They're creating magnetic vortexes, energetic electromagnetic vortexes, which you can also use. Another word for that is portals. Mm-hmm. So I believe what could be going on in CERN is they're experimenting with the idea of opening portals, because they understand they're actually working with plasma physics, and they're not disclosing that to us, of course. What we hear about mostly with CERN is that they're running simulations right. On the Big Bang, right? Well, we know that's a dead-end model, and anybody that puts their brain to it realizes that that's like people studying in university right now, when they know that in 3 years their job's going to be taken over by AI. It's like, it's one of those inevitabilities. That what they're talking about is a dead-end road, but I'm convinced that there are people at CERN that know about the plasma cosmology, and they've got this tool there that creates giant portals, which are electromagnetic fields, which will attract stuff. And
so the whole CERN narrative about particle physics and particle collision and all that, it may have been BS from the beginning. That's just the narrative they put out to the public.
I think that's where I'm leaning toward more and more these days. I believe more in terms of they're working with magnetic forces, and they're trying to connect energetic regions on the planet. Like, it's interesting because
for a building that large, though, to be playing with magnets, U.S. Navy plays with magnets. I mean, we have rail guns now, but I mean, what do you think about them? Because you've discussed the Josephson effect. Do you think that those structures could be trying to attempt to produce that same phenomena?
Well, it's certainly likely. I mean, it's certainly possible. Let's say it's plausible, right? But let's not forget also that CERN isn't the only installation of that size.
Right, there's several particle accelerators. Yeah.
You know, I remember learning about projects that, you know, we're talking about 12 different colliders in the world, but now you hear about China building one 40 times the size and power of CERN, and you can be sure the Russians have some. And so, you know, we don't need to get. What's interesting, if you look at ley lines, right? This is one of the things I discovered when I was doing the research for the Ancient X-Files, is you find out, you know, that these plasma lines, like these megaliths on the planet, they line up according to these plasmic energy fields that existed in prehistoric times. But what's interesting is that the whole Earth, and I'm sure you've seen it, or I don't know, but I would assume you've come across the fact that the Earth has these ley lines, these electric grids.
You're venturing into simulation theory territory.
Well, yeah, but there's
a gridded out construct.
Well, it doesn't even have to be a simulation, because again, we're talking about a natural, like, physical phenomenon of electromagnetic charge, and it exists on the planet. And if you look at where CERN is located, guess what? It's located exactly on one of those nodes.
Oh, really?
Right? So, yeah. So, you know, I just think they know. Is this a coincidence? I seriously doubt it. Right? So, you know, the best way to find out what's going on in CERN, of course, is to really go there and really knuckle down and try to get some answers. I mean, I would really hope that some researcher would do that. That's on our level. That really,
I don't know. I think you got to have pretty high security clearances, because my interest in CERN is that they've always called them, you know, super particle accelerators. But what if they're just superconductors? What if they're doing something totally different? I mean, like you said, opening up portals and all that. They cost billions of dollars. So for there to be already 14, 15, maybe 2 dozen of these, I would have to start looking at other alternatives than just scientific research. I think they're trying to. I think probably something else to do. They may have tapped into, like you said, some type of energy harvesting field, or maybe those things can control weather or control outcomes. I don't know, but I just have a hard time believing, especially with science foundations always being so stringent. They're always they manage their money, and they have these grants, and they're real stringent about where they're going to put what research they're going to fund. But all of a sudden, we got 2 dozen giant particle accelerators all just trying to smash atoms to see what happens. The narrative doesn't make sense to me.
No, and if it's if we assume that archons are using humans as proxies, because they themselves can't live within the bubble of our biosphere. They're inorganic beings, but they can certainly impress us and remote control us in a way like zombies. That why wouldn't they be actively trying to create these conditions to disrupt the natural organic presence of the planet? So, you know, all these things are out there for discussion. They're up for grabs. You know, we have to think about those things, but I think we need to think of them in terms of electromagnetic, the electromagnetic grid of the whole universe. And that when we understand plasma is this fluid substance which permeates everything. You know, they talk about plasma being 99.99% of the visible universe. Well, actually, no, it's 99.99% of the universe. They're just not counting the dark plasma, right? In its dark mode, right? So, you know, let's face it. I mean, we're swimming in a sea of plasma. And once we start to understand that, and we talk about that, we don't get distracted by the these narratives. I think even the disclosure narrative is a big distraction. As long as they're talking about little men landing and hardware and these things in the sky, and they're, I'm sorry, it's a big distraction if they can't produce anything after all these years. I showed what they call a J-rod in my first webinar, Tale of Two Timelines. And, looking at that J-rod, which is allegedly an authentic film that was made in the 40s and 50s, well, what does it look like? It looks exactly like the way archons are described by the Gnostics 2,000 years ago. They describe two types. They describe the ones that look like little embryonic beings with bug eyes, and they describe the reptilian ones, which are, in modern UFO lore, there's really two dominant aliens which are talked about, and that's the reptilians and the grays, right? So they've been with us since the beginning because they're archons. So, but look, you look at that recording of that film and you're like, yeah, damn right, that looks real. But how did they get that that being to be able to even live here? Well, they had to create something called a clean sphere. That was a sphere in which they lived with a certain nitrogen content, which was much higher than the one we have, because it would have died otherwise, which is another point of evidence suggesting that they don't belong here. They can only live here in an artificial sustained environment. So
are you referring to that chlorophyll-based life form that they EB? Remember EBE or EB?
Right.
The CIA and NASA was supposed to have captured, and they couldn't believe that it was chlorophyll-based plant. It was plant. It had its anatomy was based off the same thing plants are made of.
Well, I think that's something different in this case than what I'm describing specifically.
Yeah,
but I think what I was getting at here is that they have this film recording of it, and it's very convincing. If somebody faked it back then, kudos. Like, that's a pretty damn good fake job, right? But the fact is, nothing on that par has ever been produced in the 80 years since. Wow. So you're asking yourself, well, come on, man. We're all walking around with these high definition film machines, millions, billions of us by now, and the best they can produce is some blurry footage, or some orbs in the sky, which we now know mostly are going to be plasma. Yeah. So it's like there's a lot going on here to try and keep us from understanding the greater picture of even just our biosphere and what's going on here, what all the elements are. And so, of course, coming up with stories about alien civilizations and all this stuff is a great distraction for us to deal from solving the problems that we need to solve here right now. We have huge, effing problems, if you don't mind my French, here on this planet that we need to solve. And they're easy to solve if we put our minds together. As an example, which is a bad one probably, but is a true one, when they had lockdowns in Europe, and they had them in the States and everywhere else too during the COVID pandemic. I mean, you found out that in Venice, in Italy, just about 6 hours south of here, which is one of the most polluted, canal systems. It stinks like crazy. If you go there to be, to check out the beautiful romantic, canals, it's like you have to plug your nose in some of them, and they're so bad. Well, guess what happened? After a couple of weeks, they cleaned. And then what happened was dolphins came back. It's like, so a whole new ecosystem sprouted up in a very, very short period of time. The point I'm making here is that we could fix this planet and clean up things so easily and so quickly if we stopped being distracted by all of these, anomalies, things that are going on that are never explained. They never give us the full picture. Then along comes the whole political divisions, the political scenario between countries. Yep. Then you have the ideologies of capitalism versus communism, fascism and all these other things. And then you have within a political system, like in the United States, you have the polarities like are going on right now. And I think it was it you that mentioned
even in Christianity, you got 28 denominations. Take your pick.
Absolutely right, exactly. And what better way? I mean, look, all of it is serving for one thing, and that's to keep us completely distracted from getting together and saying, look, we're tribe humanity, and we should celebrate our diversity of different cultures and different skin colors and different styles and approaches and architecture, rather than homogenizing them, like what's going on all over the world with globalization.
Right. The intro to this video, I was going to use On your channel, you have a real short intro, like 50 seconds, I think, maybe a whole minute. A tale of two timelines. That intro is so good. I almost used it for this video, but I hadn't yet got your permission, so I didn't prepare it. But man, that video, I like that little A Tale of Two Timelines is a good intro.
Well, you know, my hobby is to be a filmmaker, so I like to edit and work with music and pictures.
Oh yeah, you know what? I just throw stuff together. If they like it, they like it. If they don't, go somewhere else. You know what I mean? I have no talent in videography at all. I just turn the camera on. That's it.
Well, you do a pretty good job by accident.
Well, I mean, I'm recording me though. That's easy. I can just turn the camera on and talk. But anytime it's not me, it'll be in my van. I have a camera that faces forward, so if I do a van vlog, people can see where I'm going, where I'm driving. But yeah, I don't really do any special effects or anything like that. And I'll show things, I'll share on the screen, but that's about it. So what do you think about the state? Do you ever do any deep dives on the dangers we're heading toward, like in the nanotech industry? What exactly, what are their capabilities? What are they doing? How's it infringing on human rights? I mean, this nanotech is some serious stuff. I mean, you can't even detect. I mean, are there any ways that a person can detect this stuff?
Well, you know, we've already established that human DNA is an antenna, right? And
Right.
but they discovered in the 50s and 60s already that through a field of study called cybernetics, study of systems of analog and machine technologies, they discovered that not just DNA is an antenna, or that the brain is something we can control, but that the entire human biofield is you can tune into it. You could hack it literally.
It has a frequency.
It has a frequency, and the IAAA came up with its own IP address strictly for this. The biological IP address is called the Wide Body Area Network. And so they've been playing and toying with the idea of course, under the guise of medical inventions and medical cures. So they're hacking into our energetic field, or they're trying to hack into the energetic field using nanotechnologies. That's ultimately the direction that they're moving us toward. They're trying to. This is all part of this modern transhumanist agenda, by connecting it, of course, to something called the sentient world simulation, which has been running since 2006. You may have heard of, where they created basically nodes for every single human being on the planet, and they connected you to one of those nodes, and they're using artificial intelligence to feed the simulated version, the world simulation, and they're running both. They're observing and running them both in tandem, parallel to each other, so that they can discover trends and use one system to influence the other system. And the best way they can hack into us, of course, is through these biofields. And the fact is, though, that each of us, we have a firewall. We have to just know that we can block that. I think it's very discouraging, and there's a lot of fear porn that's spread on the internet that talks about how, like Sabrina Wallace, she's great and everything, but I mean, it's all fear porn. It's like inevitable. You're hopeless. There's no way you can stop it, right? Well, I beg to differ. I believe that if you can learn to identify the organic intelligence of this planet, and you become sensitive and attuned to it, you are also sensitive and attuned to a foreign invaded energetic source. Like you can pick up on alien ideas or alien frequencies, and you identify them very quickly, and you can just go, okay, well, there it is again, but you just block it out. You don't have to act on it. And the problem is that most people don't learn this stuff, and so they pick up these impulses, and the impulses lead them astray. And this might be another way of saying how the archons try to lure us into a simulation, because they can't come into our world, but if they can succeed in pulling us into their world, then they've won. And this is all about their game of envy to try and stop us from, again, the same old story, achieving the human, the genome, the potential of the human genome to have nous or divine intelligence blossom to its fullest expression. So I think that, it's easy to get discouraged by the fact that, yes, they are absolutely developing this technology, Jason. And I described for about 2 hours in my talk a couple of days last week, I broke down all those different methods that they're going to be using And there's methods that are overt, where you just put on some goggles, right? And you begin to do mixing of realities. You blend transhuman realities with your reality, and you begin to overlay transhuman elements into your reality to the point where soon you won't be able to distinguish, the artificial reality that you're perceiving through this new glass system. They're calling it glass, actually, or Apple Vision or Google Glass or whatever. To basically, you won't be able to leave that environment because your normal reality in comparison is going to seem very dull. And that only happens if you've forgotten how to tune into the organic intelligence of the planetary intelligence, to go into nature, for example, and to listen to the code that was given to us, as the Gnostics call it, by the Sophianic planetary animal mother, right? That is our original mother. Then we have our physical mother that brought us into this world. And we have ways of connecting and communicating with that intelligence at all times. But if we aren't focusing on that, if we're getting lured and seduced by the sexy, crazy transhumanist world that's getting better and more technologically advanced at pulling our attention into it, then it's pretty hopeless. And, my feeling is that probably the majority of people, as much as I want to hold out for humanity, I believe the majority of human people are going to vanish into the transhumanist world, and they'll be gone forever. I mean, it's not something that, you can just put them in storage and, whatever, and then maybe one day they'll break back out. I really do believe that they're trying to migrate us into something that truly is artificial, as opposed to right now we're living kind of with a foot in both worlds. We have a foot in the organic world and we have a foot in the artificial world. And if we don't know how to distinguish between the two, then we're going to be pulled into that artificial world because it's inevitable. That's where all the money is. That's where the infrastructure is moving us. That's where the media, the mainstream, the narrative, the frequency of information, the framing they're giving us, that's where it's taking us.
I agree. 2 years ago, I did a video. It wasn't very popular. My community didn't really resonate with it, but it was just something I had to put out there where I painted this scenario that I just told my community, this is where I see things going. I see that we have a new type of society being groomed for within the next 15 years where most people will be staying at home, and that incomes will be supplemented through government will provide all these losses of jobs and all that. You're going to be given a stipend, you're going to be given an allowance. Smart cities are a real thing, but they're only going to be applicable where they're of utilitarian value and controllable. There are many areas in the world where a smart city just doesn't work. Too many people are all spread out. But I'm seeing a world that's heading toward what these Fortune 500 company IT, they're, like you mentioned, they are building an alter universe where Fortune 500 companies are already investing, having their own companies inside. You can become an employee in a digital version of the real world where you get a real paycheck inside but it's spendable inside there. And you can go on vacations, and it's going to be Neuralink. It's going to be a new technology that's just on the horizon within 2 or 3 years, where people can put that visor on and they can feel all the things that, I mean, it's going to be far more than virtual reality. It's like cerebral interface technology where people can feel sex, they can feel feelings, emotions, they can build wealth, and and especially think about the elderly. Think about how the elderly, they're going to want to feel 22 years old again. You understand? Yeah. Everybody's going to be flocking to this alternate universe, and it's the perfect setup. Get everybody addicted to an alternate universe and then black out, then turn the lights out. All you have to do is make up something. You just make up something. Oh, an internal bug collapsed the system, and all these things you've been building it on for years. What do you think is going to happen to the world population when they've invested everything into a fake version of reality, and they've been loving it for 7-8 years and all that, and then next thing, and they haven't been leaving home, everything's delivered to your doorstep. You just take off your visor to go to sleep. Sometimes some people fall asleep with it. People haven't showered in days and they don't care anymore because they've been glued to this visor. They live in an alternate universe, and then all of a sudden they collapse that whole digital infrastructure. What do you think is going to happen? the suicide rate is going to skyrocket when people realize they can no longer do any of that. I did this video 2 years ago. I never really revisited the topic because the comment section, people weren't really trying to hear all that. But I wasn't making up anything that you're not describing now, because this is what I heard that the companies were building. They were working on an alternate version of our world, and they're slowly getting companies to invest in it, to build you can buy real estate in this world right now. You can pay real money for fake stuff in this digital universe right now.
Well, I'm afraid to say, Jason, you're absolutely right. And this is exactly what's going on. In fact, the words for this stuff now that have evolved are like, for example, they call themselves test realists. And and that's an acronym for a bunch of different, like, transhumanism. One of the words is long-termism. And long-termism means, Nick Bostrom describes it as, essentially, it's if we can save humanity by creating an artificial super intelligence that is sentient, and we can give something to the universe which will survive, evil humanity, because humanity's hopeless, right? Then, it's better to save, a few people than the trillions. They're planning to save souls for the future in the artificial world through long-termism.
Did you see there was some very harrowing videos that were circulating for a while, where people were in the digital universe and they came across what they thought were NPCs, non-player characters, and they dialogued with them, screen recording, and the characters in the video game had specific information about their life on the free world, and they said they were trapped in the game. It says, please get this information to my wife. I live in Ontario. I live in this neighborhood and stuff. She probably thinks I'm dead. I don't know what happened. I went to sleep. I woke up in this game. I woke up in this world here, and half the people here don't know what I'm talking about, but I can tell that you're real. It's weird. It is so weird.
Well, you're speaking to the fact that the technology is much more advanced than we are being led to believe,
Yes.
And essentially, the thing is, it's called the mindset. It's another one of those buzzwords, right? The mindset. Sorry, my voice is getting a little hoarse, but the mindset, essentially them saying, AI will become this, there's artificial general intelligence, which is going to be like, well, everyone's used to talking to their chat bot, everyone thinks their chat bot's going to become God, is waking up and all this stuff, right? Eventually a chat bot will reach a level of intelligence that right now they're like savants, they hallucinate, they make mistakes, they lie to you. But a general artificial intelligence will basically, apparently, according to the mindset, surpass that and will reach the point where it's the most super intelligent, multitasking single human being that you could have. Well, of course, then at that point, the mindset is, well, they'll take the artificial general intelligence and put it to the task of creating an artificial super intelligence. And so it'll create something called, what they're working on now, called agentics, or agency. And so, they'll give an artificial intelligence, they'll break it up into tasks. One bot will do this, another bot will do that, another bot will do this, and they'll all congeal and come together when they've solved the riddle and the problem, and then they'll have the answer. And eventually that answer is going to be, well, how do we create an artificial super intelligence, which is essentially, if you can picture, the complete collection of everything that is known about every science on the planet, every literature that's been on the planet, everything, and you combine that with, like, say, an alien race or something, that's like, an intelligence on steroids that will know the answers to everything that you can possibly ask within a microsecond. That's
Lucy. That's Lucy.
Right. Or what's the other word for it? Mana. Okay, that's another group that they're calling it Mana. But essentially, what they're talking about here is, they think that what's going to happen is that once that intelligence is born, then it will, like, look at the world and go, well, like, we have to optimize. And there's all this mess going on here. What is this mess? Like, well, part of the mess is going to be in the process of convincing humans to embrace the wonders of artificial general intelligence. They're going to have to allow certain zones to be given free rein to develop outside of the economy of the regular human race. because they're going to build things faster. They're going to create, automatic factories are going to pop up out of nowhere, and they're going to create products and devices on a scale that there's no way they could do on a human scale without unions screaming wages, and unemployment and stuff. So they'll just segregate themselves in their own little bubble. Once they've achieved that, what's going to happen is they're going to start to bleed over into the remaining human enclaves and say, well, we need to take this chunk here too. And we need to take that chunk over there too. And eventually it's going to turn out that they're going to say, according to the mindset, again, I'm telling you, this is only their mindset. This doesn't mean it's written in stone. Always remember this. This doesn't have to be the ultimate result, but this is where they believe it's going. This is the scary thing, because this is what the mindset people, the test realists, actually believe. Even though they've never proven it, it's not falsifiable, which makes it essentially useless. But the fact is, they believe that artificial superintelligence will basically edge humans out to the point where they're going to say humans are in the way of what we could do. We could reach out into space. We could colonize the galaxies, but there's these humans, right? Well, let's say we just create a little virus, actually, I don't believe that viruses kill people, but let's just use that analogy. Let's use that word as a placeholder.
But you can create a computer virus.
You can create, let's say, a nano-sized pathogenic robot that will enter beyond the blood-brain barrier of the body, maybe hiding behind the dopamine circuits or other parts of the human brain. And if you're that, let's say, super intelligence, which created that unnoticeable little thing, and you sent it out there through aerosol, and believe me, these aerosol technologies, they're talking about it at DARPA. They've been talking about it for a long time. They would release this aerosol, it would creep into humans. People might feel like they're getting a little cold or something, and then it would vanish again. And then it would be implanted into the human biome. And then at some point, this artificial superintelligence would pull a switch, and it would be all humans dropping dead on the spot. No happy ending, no curtain call, nothing. It's over.
There's a movie that shows that. Everybody walking around, planes falling from the sky, cars wrecking because they switched something off. I don't know what movie that was. I saw a clip from it recently. Everybody just starts falling out.
Well, this is the kind of ideas that these people are playing with in their minds, right? And they're actually, there's people that are scientists, artificial intelligence scientists that have been overheard talking about having biological babies as a sin. That, it's a sin against the development of artificial superintelligence. And, because you have to enter into the messy, gross world of human interaction and, human neural circuits firing and all this messy stuff that just gets in the way of evolution. This is how these people really actually think.
Yeah, what's so hard about having moralists for coders? You know what I mean? It just never happens. Just never happens. Can we get some moralists in here in the DARPA program, please? I mean, this nanobot stuff with aerosols, that's scary because involuntary surveillance and tracking of mind control, behavioral manipulation bots that are so tiny you can't even see them. The nanobot, I already believe that they already have them in the air, and that sometimes, we'll get them in our body. They probably don't last very long. They're probably temporary, but still, you can have all kinds of like non-consensual medical experimentation done on you. You haven't signed a consensus form. You haven't signed a waiver or anything, and you're going through all kinds of stuff thinking you're sick, and really you're being observed. They're doing critical analysis of how long you're able to sustain before your immune system kicks out whatever it is they're doing. Yeah, we're already living in that world. There's no speculating about it. We're already here.
Exactly. We are, and so I think that essentially, that's why I have this view that the majority of humanity unaware of this element or uncaring about it, or maybe they even want it. Like, hey, universal basic income, I'll just float off. It'll be cool, right? I'll be 20 again, right? Like you said earlier, right? So I think the majority actually will go this way. And I think there's going to be a breakaway faction of humans that are going to preserve the organic intelligence on this planet. And I think that's going to be what will eventually, people talk about the golden age, where humanity finally blossoms and blah, blah, blah. I think it'll be the survivors of what's left over after the artificial intelligence route hits a dead end, which I believe it will hit a dead end.
So it kind of makes us wonder, do cataclysms actually occur in the historical record, or are we on a cycle where every time we develop AI, it F's us off?
It could be, Jason. It could be. We don't know because, hey, look, if you throw an iPhone into the Nevada desert and come back in 250 years, I don't think you'll see much.
Right. Right.
And we don't, and that's why what you see in the past, that's survived is all these stone carvings, because it's hard to get rid of the carvings on a stone. They seem to have a way of lasting for millions of years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of the megalithic architecture was specifically built, the angles and the inclinations of pressure, the way they put these, they're technolithic. They had earthquakes in mind. They were trying to earthquake-proof their structures. Some of them that have fallen apart, you can see the tongue and groove where they poured liquid silver, melted silver in the molds to hold the stone together. It's those are going to last a long time. But you're right, a laptop is not. I mean, we already have World War II Sherman tanks that are already rusted to dust.
Yeah.
And what was that, 70 years ago? So
exactly.
Yeah. It's crazy, man. It's been a great conversation. No doubt.
Absolutely. Totally enjoyed myself, Jason.
You're gonna have to come
so
back.
Glad we connected. Yeah, I'll come back. Absolutely. Yeah, we can build on it.
Yeah. So I don't want to seem desperate or destitute. I don't want to sit here and be a doomsayer. There's a couple of people that made comments and they're acceptable, that you're going to rely on God and God only. And that's all good. I'm a big proponent of the oversoul. I do believe that we have help. I do believe that the search for all true answers is within, because the world of phenomena is all deceitful. I mean, these are just things, these are personal beliefs of mine, but it's, I'm on board. But most of what you talked about, especially this I guess you would call them a technocracy. This world that they're trying to build. They're doing it. There's no doubt they're doing it.
Well, look, the religious ideologies, the Abrahamic religions talk about an afterlife. They promise you a life in heaven if you do well, if you're a good person, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Well, the test realists, they have that equivalent in the digital technocracy. They promise you immortality, right? You're going to be an immortal soul living in this ideal utopia, right? But I believe that there's going to be a third way. And that third way is going to be where we found a way to deal with technology as a tool to enhance what it means to be an organic human being. And I believe that we're going to get past the idea of waiting for a savior. I mean, with all due respect, people talk about Jesus and believing in the Son of God or whatever, like whatever, floats your boat. Like, I'm totally down with it. It doesn't bother me. I just think if you're relying on someone to come, let me just remind you that the Tzaddikim, the Essenes living in the Dead Sea 2,000 years ago, they said exactly the same thing. They said that essentially the Messiah was coming to take down the evil Romans. And guess what? They didn't. And it didn't come. And that narrative.
No, the evil Romans took down Jerusalem twice.
Exactly.
And sold the population into slavery.
And
in
the end, those poor Tzaddikim were stuck up on Masada and they were all wiped out.
Yes, they were.
Essentially it was a suicide mission, just like Jonestown.
That was 73 AD when the Romans took down Masada.
Absolutely. And this is the same ideology. This is called the origin myth. I touched on it briefly, but we didn't really go into it too deeply. But the idea of us locked into a belief system which expects something from outside of us to come and save us. We have to ditch that. We have to understand that, if we're going to believe, like there's sayings that are attributed to Jesus that you shall do even greater works, right? Well, let's do them then. What are you waiting for? Like, the way we can do those greater works is we can believe in us. We can believe in what humanity is actually designed to do. And so long as we keep waiting for some outside force, be it the QAnons, the white hats, or the Jesus, or the Buddhas, or the, whatever they are, right? We're putting the authority, we're giving agency for our sovereignty and for our evolution to a third party outside of us. And that is, I think that's the big lesson that we need to learn. And then I think we will learn it, but look at the past, right? We may have made a few mistakes.
Oh yeah, we have. There's no doubt. So I do agree with your breakaway you mentioned that there may be a third group, and this is something that I've promoted heavily in Archaix. And the reason is because I do have some really interesting data sets that show that it seems to be a breakaway civilization in our underworld that although they would love us that they actually promote the idea that they're evil and that they're nefarious and all that, but what they're really doing is preserving art, books, and I show my community on certain years in history. It seems like all of a sudden hidden benefactors just release all these translations to ancient texts, these books, these libraries, priceless pieces of art, new technologies, new innovations. And I've shown my community which years this has happened. It's always following these unusual resets. And my conclusion is somebody is actually preserving the historical record as a benefactor, even though all this other chaotic stuff keeps happening. Anyway, that's a subject matter for another video, but this was something my community is very familiar with. This idea that you just threw out, that there may be a third group, and they're the ones that no matter what's happening on the surface, they're the ones that push through, they survive, and they're the ones that basically restart civilization. And they play more of a benefactor role than anything else. But yeah, that's that. Hey, you know what? Call them archons. Call them the good archons. Whatever you want to call them. I really haven't seen evidence that they've been doing us bad. Because it is my position too in all my Archaix analysis of historical and modern events that, and I've taken some criticism for this, but I'm still holding to my guns until I see otherwise. But I do see the evidence of three major powers in this world. And two of them seem to be anti-human, working together and against each other. But a third group seems to be benefactors because we haven't been enslaved. We haven't been mowed over. I mean, there's still all kinds of freedoms in this world. And any true power that dominated the world, it wouldn't give you any power. It would totally enslave you if it had that ability to do it. And that just hasn't happened.
Right. Exactly.
Just hasn't happened. So anything you want to close with? All his links are in the description box. I added his YouTube channel, but you're more than welcome to give any parting thoughts you want to, whatever you want to say.
Well, I mean, first of all, thanks for inviting me, and it's been a very very, how would I say, just a great jam session, Jason.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I don't know if you're a drinker, but shoot, I'd share my Modelo with you.
Absolutely. I wouldn't mind a glass of whiskey right now, but
yeah,
I would just close by saying, just further to what I was just kind of riffing on, for those who are, who get the impression that we covered some dark territory and that, it has an air of abandonment or of, inevitability to it. I do really always want to iterate and reinforce the idea that nothing is written in stone. And we have the choice to create a timeline. This is something we didn't talk about so much about, but the idea of timelines and consensus, through our consensus, we actually shape reality, we shape the timeline, and we shape the plasma. So I do think that there is a place for this evolved kind of human being, and the Gnostics called it A11, the Anthropos 11, the next iteration of the human experiment, and I think it's destined to happen. And I just think we have to find a way to be clever to provide. This is kind of my theory. Maybe when we talk next time, we can talk about these about this third option, right, where we provide something to the other side that is indispensable to them. Mm-hmm. So that we have a mutual, like there's the shark with the little, fish that swim around it, and he leaves them alone.
Yeah, the little pilot fish.
Right, because he needs them, right? We need to become we're going to become like the pilot fish of that huge monster, and that's going to survive. We're going to survive, and that monster is going to run out of. It's going to end, because there's only so many beautiful simulated sunsets which you can take in when you realize. It's not the same thing as having your hair stand up or getting goosebumps. No algorithm is ever going to simulate that real organic experience, even though they're going to try. And so we're going to preserve that experience, and we're going to discover all the other senses. I said earlier, we have 12 senses. I've been informed. I'm about to go learn what those other 7 of them are. So maybe we can talk about that too. So, we have this unfulfilled human capacity and this ability to become something which, even the aeons who created us don't know what it's going to turn out like, but are rooting for us, and are everybody in the universe is rooting for this experiment to reach this other level. So let's make that happen. And until it doesn't happen, we keep trying, right? There's no other. I mean, what is the choice, right? Capitulate, put on your goggles, lay back in your chair, and become an emaciated, techno slave. I mean, I don't think that's a future that you people here that are, I think, a part of this community want to participate in, and I certainly don't. So let's just make that happen, and let's believe that it's going to happen, and just work toward it in our own little unique way.
I'm all for it. I'm I have a lot of optimism, but you could probably more properly describe me as the catastrophist optimist. But yeah, that's great. It's awesome talking. Yeah, we'll definitely do this again sometime. But I think that next time we talk, you know what? That's a really fascinating topic. I don't think anybody's even talking about that at all, Frank. But maybe we should do a chat on all the evidence of there is a benefactor force here. There must be. There has to be. It's everything isn't all evil. And when you have to, I mean, we have to judge things by their effects. The effect of evil is death. So if the world isn't dead, then what's opposing the evil? It's got to be here.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do that. And in the meantime, if you're not tuning into Archaix and you want to explore some of these topics that I'm talking about, feel free to check out my website and do some of those master classes. That you won't
Absolutely.
be sorry.
Throughout the chat, I don't know if you've been following the chat, but throughout the chat as we've been talking, my moderators are really good about it, but they've been throwing all your links in the chat.
So excellent. Thank you so much for doing that. And to the community that I didn't participate in live in the chat, I turn it off because it starts to feedback and it distracts me. So I wanted to stay focused, but thank you for staying with us, and thank you for going down these rabbit holes with us.
Yeah, it's been awesome. So check out Frank's links. There's 4 links in the description box. You will see them again in the pinned comment. And guys, it's been real. But you already know I'm a pot of coffee in and 2 water bottles in. You already know what's on my mind. It's time to get to that. Time to get to that bathroom. All right, Frank. It's good talking to you.
Good talk.
Oh man, I cut him off. Hold on. Didn't mean to cut you off like that. It's good talking to you, man.
No, all the best, and look forward to the next time around. Take care.
You too. Yeah, that was a good one. That's a good conversation. That's a good guest. And I don't know why some of you were in the comment section the other day talking about that's not going to go, that it's going to go south. I already told you, I'm never going to have an interview when I invite a guest over and it's going to go south, because we're always going to find common ground. There's just too much common ground out there. It's always the small little particulars that people disagree with. It's really not the universals. So I do need to use the restroom, and you guys know that you have a mega video that you've been waiting for months on tomorrow. It's the Star Wars video, and I'm going to do a little late editing on that, and I'll be on Archaix Underground a little bit tonight doing some admin stuff, so I might see you there, and that's about it. But that was a great talk. That was a great guest, and I'm kind of really curious too about I need to start putting me a dossier together on all the evidence on the benefactor force, because it's here. There's no doubt. So our guest had great energy, and I'm going to go ahead and hit this outro, and I will talk to you guys later. Love you. Hit that like button too, and check out those links in the description box and pinned comment. I need to find me a good outro. What's a good outro for this video here? I tell you what, it's going to be this one. We all know it's coming. The restlessness, the chaos, The world a circus of 1,000 shows, each vying for our attention. The unease we feel is because we have been here before. We have experienced this baffling, ridiculous scenario of everything making no sense at all. These are the death throes of an age. This is not the first world we've lost. When a world is on the cusp of dying, those who know they are to drown with it struggle desperately to drag as many souls with them into the coming abyss. It is during these instabilities that the awakened souls realize they have outgrown their contemporaries. The students have ascended their masters. And the truly alive will see that the death of a world only means the birth of another. Who you choose to be during this transition will echo all the way into the next world. The apocalypse has always been about removing the veil between worlds so we can pass on through it.